Namaskar. In this lecture, we'll be understanding a very important value from ethics called prudence. This is very important with respect to paper 4 of GS, which is asked in mains. Right? Now let's understand the simple definition of prudence. अगर हिंदी में बात करें, prudence का मतलब होता है विवेक. विवेक simply put means practical wisdom. Now let's get to the meaning of prudence. Prudence means that it is the ability of an individual to govern oneself by the use of reason. यहाँ reason का क्या मतलब है? Rationality. To reiterate, a person acting in prudence is actually acting with rationality. एक व्यक्ति जो prudence से अपने decisions ले रहे हैं, वो actually में rationally अपने decisions ले रहे हैं. ठीक बात. Secondly, whenever we are trying to give the definition of prudence, we have to include two very important points. The first point is that prudence involves sagacity and alertness in management of affairs. अब सीधी सी बात आती है कि what exactly do we mean by sagacity? Well, sagacity means ability of an individual to comprehend complex issues and complex ideas. To put it in context to prudence, सीधी सी बात है, एक तरफ हम ये कहते हैं इंडिविजुअल शुड एक्ट इन रैशनैलिटी सो एज टू बी प्रूडेंट, बट ये बात भी तो ज़रूरी है टू बी एक्टिंग इन रैशनैलिटी दैट अ पर्सन इज एक्चुअली एबल टू कॉम्प्रीहेंड द इशू. एक इशू की कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज़ को कॉम्प्रीहेंड कर पा रहा है, एक इशू के डायनामिक्स को कॉम्प्रीहेंड कर पा रहा है, क्या क्या अल्टरनेटिव्स हैं, क्या क्या ऑप्शंस हैं. This is where sagacity becomes a prerequisite for a person to act in a prudent manner, right? Let's come to the second point which needs to be mentioned while we are explaining it. That is, prudence also involves careful analysis and circumspection to make good judgments while taking decisions. जब भी कोई इंडिविजुअल डिसीजन लेंगे, इट इज़ नेसेसरी कि उन्होंने सिचुएशन की एनालिसिस और सर्कमस्पेक्शन कर रखा है, उसके बाद ही वो जजमेंट तक पहुंच रहे हैं. तो ये दो बातें इज समथिंग विच नीड्स टू बी केप्ट इन माइंड व्हाइल गिविंग द डेफिनेशन ऑफ प्रूडेंस. ठीक बात. Another important aspect which needs to be kept in mind is what Aristotle had actually said about prudence. Aristotle said that prudence is an eminently desired practical wisdom which is necessary in a leader. Leader in context to civil services is actually a public servant. So this again is something which you could mention so as to score that extra point. Now that we have understood the meaning of prudence, another important aspect which we need to keep in mind for civil services is the relevance of prudence with respect to public services. And here you need to be careful because you shouldn't be giving some general or generic examples of how exactly is it relevant. तो यहाँ पे we'll discuss some specific ways in which prudence is very necessary for a public servant. The first such point is conflict of interest. देखिए, a public servant works in a position of authority. Invariably, he will find himself in so many situations where potential conflict of interest can happen, a direct conflict of interest can happen, and a perceived conflict of interest can happen. So, prudence will help a civil servant to actually identify a conflict of interest and take proactive steps in order to avoid it. Right? The second point which is very important here is that prudence is also required in policy making. अब policy making में कैसे? ये तो हम सब जानते ही हैं कि policy making involves to evaluate stakeholders, to evaluate options, to evaluate contingencies कि अगर हमारी policy fail हो जाती है, what all are the contingencies in place. This also requires prudence. The third point is with respect to decision making where discretionary power has been endowed to a public servant. For example, curfew, imposition of curfew. There has to be certain circumstances which needs to be there for a public servant to believe, or for that matter, a DM to believe that curfew needs to be imposed. That assessment of the situation would require DM to have prudence in his decision making. Last but not the least, prudence is very important, in fact is paramount with respect to emotional intelligence, which is a topic there in ethics and is very important to quote here with respect to relevance of prudence in public services. Emotional intelligence होता क्या है? Simply put, that a person should be able to keep his emotions in check and prudence helps an individual so as to keep his emotional intelligence going. This is all we need to know with respect to prudence.